Welcome to the show. Virtually any news site you visit these days is filled with stories about the many illnesses plaguing the American public. The main focus of these stories is the diseases, but some articles provide advice about how to mitigate or avoid these diseases. 99% of that advice is flat out wrong. It's wrong because it parrots the same old establishment BS that resulted in America becoming the most ill society in all of human history. Today, I'm going to give you a completely different way of looking at human health and human physiology. If you listen to this thoroughly different perspective and adopt it as your framework for human health, you will join the small percentage of Americans who are incredibly healthy, have no disease, don't take any Big Pharma medications, and have no need for doctors. Sound good? Let's get into it. The Dr. Reality Vodcast with Dave Champion. Let's start with this. I'm a physiologist and author of Body Science, a groundbreaking book on human physiology that's saving lives every day. In my work, I found it necessary to assign titles to various functional systems of the body that had never been named in existing medical argot. These terms include the hepatic lipid system, lymphatic lipid system, and glucoses. I share that with you to make the point that the modern medical industry often falls far short of meeting the needs of its customers. And make no mistakes, while they call you a patient, you are, in reality, a customer. I should mention the obvious, which is that if the American people were healthy, the medical industry, as we know it, would be out of business. In other words, there is zero incentive for the medical industry, which includes MDs, to want you healthy or give you information that would result in you being healthy. In fact, a realist might consider that the medical industry is highly incentivized to give you information that will make you sick, or if you're already sick, keep you that way. To simplify today's presentation, I'm going to focus on some well-known chronic diseases you've all heard of, such as type 2 diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, cancer, obesity, immune diseases, dementia, eczema, and allergies. How does the medical community address those? Well, like this. Hypertension. Eat less salt and take this Big Pharma product for the rest of your life. Heart disease. Reduce your saturated fat intake and take this Big Pharma product for the rest of your life. Cancer. Get this obscenely expensive treatment that puts lots of dollars in the oncologist's pocket and is considered successful if the cancer returns anytime after the 3-year anniversary of the end of the treatment. Autoimmune diseases. Take a cocktail of Big Pharma products for the rest of your life. Obesity. Take this Big Pharma drug. Some doctors will recommend consuming fewer calories, which is not the answer to the problem. Type 2 diabetes. Take this Big Pharma product for the rest of your life. Some doctors will recommend consuming fewer calories, which is, again, not the answer to the problem. Eczema. Bathe, moisturize, and take Big Pharma products for the rest of your life. Dementia. Take a Big Pharma drug, lecanemab, until you die from dementia. But don't sweat it because the lecanemab causes brain shrinkage and may kill you sooner than later due to brain bleeding. Perhaps you notice that each of these diseases is viewed as independent. If you see a doctor about obesity, the doctor is going to address your obesity. If you see a doctor about an autoimmune disease, the doctor is going to address your autoimmune disease. If you see a doctor about hypertension, the doctor is going to address your hypertension. I won't go on and on because you get the point. Each disease is treated independently, as if each has a different cause and requires a treatment unique to that particular disease. That absurd approach accomplishes two things. First, it ensures the patient, the customer, remains diseased. And second, ensuring the customer remains diseased guarantees continued revenue for the medical industry and Big Pharma. But here's the thing. All of those diseases share the same underlying causation, but manifest in different ways. Thanks to the medical industry and media propaganda, Americans wrongly look at each as independent, unrelated diseases. They aren't. Before we get into the physiology, if you'll be so kind as to give me the benefit of the doubt for a moment and consider that all of the diseases I mentioned have the same root cause, then I think you will agree that medical doctors addressing each as an independent problem with a separate treatment is insanity. Yet, that's where we are. Now to the physiology. Your body is comprised of 100 trillion cells, each with its own DNA, genes, and mitochondria. There are approximately 20,000 genes in each cell of your body. Broadly speaking, genes come in two categories. Within the chromosomes, there are coding regions and non-coding regions. Genes in the coding regions are fairly well understood. Genes in the non-coding region are not well understood. Scientific researchers of the past who couldn't figure out what the non-coding sections do arrogantly pronounced those sections junk DNA. Today it is presumed, but not proven, that genes in the non-coding region control and influence which genes in the coding region get switched on or switched off. That process is known as gene expression, and we'll be discussing that shortly. What do I mean by coding region? Proteins are the foundation of almost every chemical and bioelectrical action in your body. The process by which our cells create thousands of different purpose-specific proteins is nothing short of astounding, and all of that takes place in the coding region of each cell. These processes are too complex to delve into today, but what you need to know is that in a very real sense, your health depends on the cells of your body correctly creating properly folded proteins. In body science, I suggest people stop looking at their bodies as what they see in the mirror, but rather view their bodies as a community of 100 trillion individuals. The community won't be healthy unless the 100 trillion individuals that make up the community are healthy. Another way to say it is that the whole will not be healthier than its parts. With that under our belts, let's discuss high blood glucose and high insulin levels. High blood glucose and high insulin are both toxic to every single cell in your body. You can read the details of that in Body Science, but the important message for you today is that the diets of the vast majority of Americans produce high glucose and high insulin levels multiple times a day, every day. So, let me ask you a question. How do you think your health would be if you spent several minutes breathing in carbon monoxide multiple times a day, every day? How would you feel if you consumed arsenic several times a day, every day? If these things were taking place, you would feel terrible, and you would communicate that to someone who could help, such as an emergency room doctor. Your cells obviously can't communicate with you that way. The cells have no way to tell you, hey, buddy, you're poisoning me multiple times a day, every day. You want to knock that shit off? Because the cells can't communicate with you, they simply become more and more dysfunctional over time. And just like you can't go to work and do your job well when you're sick, your cells also can't do their job properly when they're sick. So, what does it look like when your cells are sick? Again, this is a very complex physiological subject, so I'm going to simplify it by saying the gene expression within the cells diminishes in volume and or correctness. That means DNA in the non-coding region switches on or off the wrong genes in the coding region, or switches on or off the right genes, but at the wrong time. That results in the wrong proteins being made, or the right proteins being made at the wrong times, or the cells producing mutant proteins due to improper folding. Now, here's the kicker. This degradation of cell functioning from ongoing glucose and insulin poisoning of the cells does not take place the exact same way or at the exact same rate in every cell. Depending on a myriad of factors, some cells are more affected than others, and not all affected cells become dysfunctional at the same rate. If we return to the community analogy, this means some of the 100 trillion individuals in the community are not sick, others are moderately sick, some are very sick. If we take that analogy back to the human body, we end up with these questions. Which cells are experiencing no dysfunction yet? Which cells are experiencing moderate dysfunction? And which cells are experiencing considerable dysfunction? The answers to these questions determine how your body is affected. Phrased another way, which cells are impacted and to what extent determines how your body lets you know there's a problem by manifesting what we call a disease. Remember at the outset I mentioned hypertension, heart disease, cancer, autoimmune diseases, obesity, type 2 diabetes, eczema, and dementia? Each of these is the body manifesting the consequences of cellular poisoning. Which disease manifests in any particular person is the result of which cells are impacted by the poisoning, the extent of the dysfunction, and what errors are occurring from the dysfunction of the gene expression. But every single one of those diseases, and many more, share a common root cause, and that is cellular dysfunction because you're poisoning the 100 trillion cells of your body multiple times a day, every day. In other words, the root cause is the same, but the manifestation can take the form of different diseases. Do you see now why I say that doctors addressing these various diseases as if each has a unique cause and needs different treatment is insanity? That said, I don't completely blame the medical industry. A few years ago, a cardiologist buddy of mine tried to get his patients to read body science and apply what they learn. A few months later, in frustration, he told me that only about 2% of his patients had an interest in getting healthy through knowledge and action. The other 98% wanted to continue doing what was causing their disease and just wanted him to prescribe a Big Pharma product to, perhaps, ameliorate the specific manifestation, the specific disease they were experiencing. Now that you understand a bit more about the disease process, do you imagine taking a pill to ameliorate a specific manifestation is the same as being or getting healthy? Do you think the people who reject knowledge or a change in conduct, preferring to be prescribed a pill, will be getting additional diseases? Of course. That's why the number of Americans with multiple chronic diseases has skyrocketed over the past few decades. Before I continue, if you enjoy this type of content, please subscribe to the channel and mash that like button so the algorithms will show this presentation to more people who need to see this life-saving information. Also, share the hell out of it so others can benefit. Thank you. As a side note, if the American people understood what we're discussing today and had put this knowledge into action in 2018, fatalities from COVID-19 would have been roughly about 3% of what they were. For the sake of this illustration, let's leave out the distinction of dying from COVID or with COVID and just use the government's raw numbers. If the American people understood what we're discussing today and had put this knowledge into action in 2018, instead of deaths being 1,200,000, they'd be in the range of 36,000. But of course, that would have required someone, whether it be the government or the medical industry, to have told the American people what I've shared with you today. Not only did that not happen, it's not happening now, and it's not going to happen. There's too much money at stake. Big Med and Big Pharma need you to be sick. So why would they tell you how to prevent those diseases? So what's the solution? I hope it's obvious that the solution is to stop poisoning the 100 trillion cells of your body, and I hope it's apparent that the way to stop doing that is to end the cycle of high blood glucose followed by high insulin that takes place multiple times a day, every day in the bodies of most Americans. How does one stop the cycle of high blood glucose followed by high insulin from taking place multiple times a day? The most direct route is to reduce carbohydrate consumption. You can do that by adopting a low-carb diet or adopting a ketogenic diet, which will put you into the awesome state of ketosis. Let's quickly examine both options. What is a low-carb diet? Who knows? There is no standardized definition for a low-carb diet. Carbs have become such a huge part of the American diet that some groups consider low carb to be as much as 500 grams a day, which is absurd. A meaningful low-carb diet would be in the range of 100 to 150 grams of carbs a day, and the carbs would be from whole foods. But here's the problem many people experience with a meaningful low-carb diet. When on a low-carb diet, the body remains in a state of glucosis, which means the 100 trillion cells have been conditioned to use glucose as fuel, and that's what they want. So, when eating a low-carb diet, the person is strictly limiting the fuel the cells want. In other words, the cells have been conditioned for decades to use glucose for fuel, and then the person drastically curtails that fuel. That can lead to unpleasantness, such as feeling cold in circumstances in which you previously would not have felt cold, a constant nagging feeling of being hungry, feeling lethargic, and/or irritable. When people say diets never work because people rarely stick with them, that's often true of low carb because it isn't a pleasant experience for most people. Now, let's talk about the other option, eating a ketogenic diet that results in you living in ketosis. There are only two physiological ways the human body fuels cells. One is glucosis, which we just discussed. The other is ketosis. When the human body switches into ketosis, all 100 trillion cells shift from burning glucose for energy to burning primarily fatty acids and ketones to a lesser extent. In ketosis, there are no such unpleasant issues such as nagging hunger or low energy. In fact, anyone who has shifted into ketosis can verify that energy becomes abundant, far greater than when the cells were burning glucose. More importantly, in terms of today's presentation, ketosis completely eradicates the high glucose, high insulin cycle. Another way to say it is that in ketosis, it is physiologically impossible to poison your cells with toxic levels of glucose and insulin. Since the diseases we discussed earlier are all caused by the degradation of cell function, what do you think is the outcome of adopting a physiological state in which there is no longer daily poisoning causing cell function degradation? If you're thinking the outcome would be never getting the diseases we discussed or having them disappear if they already existed, and having amazing health, you hit the nail on the head. There are some other cool attributes about living in ketosis. You will never have to diet again. You can eat until you're full and never gain a pound. Not only that, but you can eat until full every meal and all your excess body fat will just fall away. I'd say it's truly amazing, but we only see it as amazing because we've gotten so removed from our ancestral diet. If you were able to travel back in time and speak with a man from 20,000 years ago, he'd have no idea why you are so fascinated about a physiological state he'd been in since birth. And of course, to the main point of this presentation, never get any of the diseases that have made Americans the most ill society in all of human history. Whether we're talking about body science or income tax shattering the myths, I specifically ask readers not to believe anything I say, but do research for themselves. In matters of physiology, that's simple by doing something called N of 1. N of 1 means using yourself as your research subject. You are your own clinical trial. Phrased another way, you try it on yourself and see what the results are. So how would you do N of 1 concerning ketosis? Simple. Either adopt the keto style of eating or go carnivore. Because I'm the author of Body Science, I already know what your results will be. The only person who needs to see the results now is you. As you might imagine, I don't just talk the talk, I walk the walk. I've been in ketosis continually for just shy of 6.5 years. Because of that, at 64 years old, I'm as healthy as when I was 18. I haven't seen a doctor in years. I don't take any Big Pharma products. I do, however, order blood tests every several months. I don't do it for me. I know what the results are going to be before I order the tests. I do them so that, having been in ketosis for 6.5 years and being carnivore for 4.5 years, I can tell you without equivocation that I am completely healthy. A couple of quick thoughts about doing N of 1 and putting yourself in ketosis. First, when you cut your carbs to less than 35 grams a day, which is what's required for most people to get into ketosis and remain in ketosis, you will feel low energy and maybe even a little grumpy for between 3 to 5 days until your body flips into ketosis. Then you will be shocked at how fantastic you feel. If you're at the point in your life where you have an ongoing relationship with your doctor, which would only be the case if you're diseased, if your MD or specialist is the kind who will tell you he or she doesn't want you eating keto or carnivore, then you may have to tell him or her to fuck off. Remember, you're in charge of you, not your doctor. Some MDs are so grossly irresponsible that a patient will go carnivore for 3 or 4 months, come back for an office visit with all his or her blood test markers significantly improved, body fat dramatically reduced, feeling 20 years younger, and the doctor will tell him or her to immediately stop eating carnivore. It's almost as if they want you to stay sick so they can keep getting the money. I know I've thrown a lot at you today. If you'd like to follow up by looking at the science of ketosis presented in a way every person can understand, you want to read Body Science. Body Science has never gotten less than a 5-star review, and just last week a reader purchased 20 copies to give to friends and family. That's how transformative the information is you'll find in Body Science. You can get Body Science at drreality.news, drreality.news. While you're there, take a look at Income Tax Shattering the Myths, the best-selling book in America that provides you with mountains of incontrovertible evidence straight from the government, proving that Congress has never imposed the income tax on ordinary, hardworking Americans like you. Whether it's ketosis or the income tax, I practice what I preach. I haven't filed an income tax return or paid a penny of income tax in 31 years. I wrote the best-selling book in the country on the subject and speak about it coast to coast. And here I sit. Perhaps I know something you should know. The only difference between those who know the truth and those who still believe the establishment's false narrative is those who know the truth took the time to read Income Tax Shattering the Myths. Once you know the truth, you can decide what you want to do about it, including safely walking away from the scam and keeping 100% of your earnings, if that appeals to you. No matter what you choose to do with your newfound knowledge, Income Tax Shattering the Myths will be one of the most fascinating books you will ever read. You have my word on that. So go to drreality.news, drreality.news, and pick up a copy of Body Science or Income Tax Shattering the Myths, or both. They will change your life. Also, by purchasing Body Science or Income Tax Shattering the Myths, or both, you help me to continue to be here for you with these revealing and thought-provoking presentations. Please share this video everywhere so others can discover the truth. Thank you for being here.